What would you do if the people who raised you slowly became the reason you had to walk away? For years, Ethan Plath was known as the quiet, loyal son of the family we all watched on Welcome to Plathville. He followed the rules, respected his parents, and lived the life that Kim Plath and Barry Plath built for him. But behind that calm personality, something was building. A silent pressure, a hidden conflict, a life he never truly chose for himself. And then suddenly, everything changed. The same Ethan who once stood by his family started pulling away. Distance turned into tension. Tension turned into emotional breakdowns. And before anyone fully realized what was happening, Ethan wasn't just disagreeing with his family anymore, he was walking away from them. So what really caused this shift? Was it love? Was it controlled? Or was it something much deeper that had been building for years? In this video, we're going to break down the real reasons why Ethan Plath left his family, from strict upbringing to relationship conflicts to the emotional moments that changed everything. But before we get into the full story, take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. If you enjoy deep dives into reality TV drama and real-life stories like this, you're definitely in the right place. Now let's get into it. The strict childhood Ethan Plath grew up in an environment that was very different from what most people would consider normal. Inside the world of Welcome to Plathville, his childhood was shaped by strict rules, strong beliefs, and a highly controlled lifestyle created by his parents, Kim Plath and Barry Plath. From a very young age, Ethan and his siblings were raised with limited exposure to the outside world. They didn't grow up watching mainstream television, using social media, or even engaging freely with modern culture. Instead, their lives were centered around family values, religion, and a belief that the outside world could negatively influence their behavior and mindset. Kim and Barry believed they were protecting their children by creating this environment. They enforced strict boundaries on what the kids could watch, listen to, and even who they could interact with. There was a clear structure in the household, and stepping outside those boundaries was not encouraged. For Ethan, this meant growing up with a very narrow understanding of how the world worked beyond his family. While other kids were exploring different ideas, building social connections, and learning independence early on, Ethan's life was mostly confined to his home and family circle. Because of this, Ethan developed a naturally obedient personality. He wasn't someone who questioned authority or challenged the rules. In fact, he seemed comfortable within that structure. Following his parents' guidance was simply what he had always known. There wasn't much room to think differently. And over time, obedience became part of his identity. He trusted his parents and believed that the life they were giving him was the right one. At the same time, this kind of upbringing also meant that Ethan didn't fully develop the tools to handle conflict or independence in the real world. He was kind, simple, and genuine, but also somewhat sheltered. His personality reflected the environment he grew up in, calm, quiet, and non-confrontational. While this made him likable, it also made it harder for him to express his own needs or stand up for himself later in life. Looking back, Ethan's strict childhood played a huge role in shaping who he became. It gave him strong values and a sense of loyalty, but it also limited his exposure to different perspectives. And as we'll see later, this exact upbringing would eventually become one of the biggest reasons why his life and his relationship with his family began to change in ways no one expected. Marriage changed everything. For Ethan Plath, life followed a predictable and controlled path until marriage changed everything. When he met and eventually married Olivia, his world began to shift in ways he had never experienced before. Olivia came from a very different background. She was more independent, more exposed to the outside world, and had a completely different perspective on life compared to the environment Ethan was raised in. While Ethan had spent most of his life following strict rules set by his parents, Olivia believed in personal freedom, self expression, and making independent choices. This difference, at first, seemed like it could balance Ethan's quiet personality, but over time, it became the center of major conflict. Inside the world of Welcome to Plathville, viewers quickly saw how this relationship started to create tension within the Plath family. Kim Plath and Barry Plath were not comfortable with Olivia's influence on Ethan. To them, she represented everything they had tried to keep their children away from: modern values, independence, and a lifestyle that didn't fully align with their beliefs. As a result, they were often critical of her, sometimes openly, and sometimes in more subtle ways. On the other side, Olivia felt like she was constantly being judged and controlled by Ethan's family. She believed that the boundaries set by Kim and Barry were not just strict, but also unhealthy, especially for a married couple trying to build their own life. Olivia wanted Ethan to think for himself, to question things, and to step outside of the life he had always known. But for Ethan, this wasn't easy. He was caught between two worlds: the family he had always trusted and the wife who was encouraging him to change. This situation put Ethan in an incredibly difficult position. For the first time in his life, he couldn't simply follow instructions or avoid conflict. He had to make choices, real emotional choices, that would affect the people he loved the most. And because he wasn't used to confrontation, this pressure started to build up inside him. Instead of expressing his feelings clearly, he often shut down or avoided difficult conversations, which only made the situation worse. Marriage didn't just add a new relationship to Ethan's life, it forced him to see everything differently. It exposed the cracks in the system he had grown up in and made him realize that the life he thought was normal might not actually be what he wanted. And as these realizations grew stronger, so did the distance between him and his family, setting the stage for even bigger conflicts ahead. Olivia versus Kim, the real clash. As time went on, the tension between Ethan Plath's wife, Olivia, and his mother, Kim Plath, turned into one of the biggest conflicts in Welcome to Plathville. What started as simple differences in personality and beliefs slowly grew into a deep and ongoing clash over control, boundaries, and influence. At the heart of the issue was a fundamental disagreement about how Ethan should live his life. Kim had spent years building a structured environment for her children, where she was the central authority figure. She believed strongly in her parenting style and expected her children to continue respecting those rules, even as they grew older. From her perspective, Olivia's presence disrupted that system. She saw Olivia as someone who was pulling Ethan away from the values she had worked so hard to instill. This created a sense of resistance from Kim, who struggled to accept the changes happening in her son's life. On the other side, Olivia viewed the situation very differently. She didn't see herself as a negative influence. She saw herself as someone trying to help Ethan grow. Olivia believed that Ethan had been overly controlled for most of his life and needed space to discover who he really was. She wanted him to experience independence, make his own decisions, and set healthy boundaries with his family. But this approach directly challenged Kim's authority, which made the situation even more intense. As a result, even small interactions between Olivia and Kim often turned into uncomfortable or emotionally charged moments. There was a lack of trust on both sides. Kim felt like she was losing control over her son, while Olivia felt like she was constantly being judged and disrespected. This tension didn't stay hidden. It became visible in family gatherings, conversations, and key moments throughout the show. For Ethan, this clash was incredibly difficult to handle. He cared deeply about both his mother and his wife, but their relationship was becoming increasingly impossible to balance. Instead of finding a middle ground, he found himself stuck between two strong personalities with completely different expectations. And because he wasn't used to standing up in conflict, he often struggled to take a clear position. This ongoing conflict between Olivia and Kim didn't just affect them, it reshaped the entire family dynamic. It created distance, emotional stress, and a growing sense that things could never go back to the way they were. What started as a difference in viewpoints had now become a defining issue in Ethan's life, pushing him closer to a breaking point that would soon change everything. Ethan caught in the middle. By the time tensions between Kim Plath and Olivia had escalated, Ethan Plath found himself trapped in a difficult and emotionally draining position. He was caught squarely in the middle of a battle between two people he loved deeply, and every choice he made seemed to upset someone he cared about. On one side was his mother, who had shaped his entire childhood, instilled values in him, and had always been the central figure in his life. On the other was his wife, Olivia, who represented freedom, growth, and the life Ethan had never fully experienced, but secretly longed for. Balancing these two worlds became increasingly impossible. For years, Ethan had lived in a structured, obedient lifestyle, rarely challenging his parents' rules. But now he was being forced to confront situations that required him to take a stance. Every decision about his own life, his marriage, his daily choices, and even small household matters was scrutinized by both women. If he supported Olivia's perspective, Kim felt betrayed. If he agreed with Kim, Olivia felt unsupported. There was no neutral ground, and this constant pressure began to wear him down emotionally. This middle ground stress had profound effects on Ethan's mental state. He started to feel a growing sense of isolation, even within his own family. Conversations that once felt normal now carried the weight of judgment. Every family gathering became a test of loyalty, patience, and endurance. Ethan's natural tendency to avoid confrontation meant that he often internalized these conflicts rather than expressing them openly. Over time, this internalization created a sense of frustration, confusion, and emotional fatigue. Ethan's struggle was also compounded by the expectations of the public and viewers of Welcome to Plathville. Fans of the show watched every interaction, forming opinions, taking sides, and amplifying the pressure on him. The constant public scrutiny made it even harder for Ethan to navigate his own feelings. He felt the weight of being a dutiful son, a loving husband, and a public figure all at once, roles that often demanded conflicting actions and emotions. In the midst of this turmoil, Ethan began to realize that staying neutral was no longer an option. The more he tried to please everyone, the more emotionally drained and disconnected he became. He felt torn between the comfort and familiarity of his past and the potential for growth and happiness in his marriage. This internal conflict marked a turning point in his journey. Ethan's experience of being caught in the middle highlights not only the challenges of balancing family and personal life, but also the emotional cost of growing up under strict rules that leave little room for independent decision-making. It was in this emotional crucible that Ethan started to understand that some choices, no matter how painful, were necessary for his own mental well-being and for the health of his marriage. And this realization would ultimately set him on a path toward change, separation, and personal freedom, decisions that would redefine his relationship with his family forever. Breaking point. After months of mounting tension, Ethan Plath reached a breaking point that would change his life forever. The pressures from his wife Olivia and the constant scrutiny from his parents, Kim Plath and Barry Plath, had built up to a level that was impossible to ignore. Small disagreements had turned into emotional arguments, and Ethan found himself emotionally exhausted, unable to find peace within the family he had once trusted so deeply. The rules and expectations he had followed all his life, which once gave him a sense of stability, now felt like chains holding him back from experiencing the life he wanted to lead. The breaking point didn't happen overnight. It was the result of countless instances where Ethan's voice was overlooked or dismissed. Every time he tried to assert his independence or make a personal decision, it led to confrontation. Kim, deeply rooted in her beliefs, continued to exert control, often in subtle ways, but also in direct criticism of Ethan's choices, particularly regarding his relationship with Olivia. Barry, although somewhat more lenient, tended to support Kim's perspective, leaving Ethan feeling cornered and isolated. At the same time, Olivia pushed him to embrace his own voice, encouraging him to set boundaries and stand up for himself. This tug of war placed Ethan in a position where he could no longer satisfy both sides, and the emotional strain was becoming unbearable. One of the defining moments leading to his breaking point came during a heated family discussion. Opinions clashed, voices were raised, and years of suppressed frustrations erupted all at once. Ethan felt misunderstood and trapped. He realized that no matter how hard he tried to mediate or compromise, the conflict wasn't going to resolve itself. The family dynamic, which had been the center of his life, now felt toxic. For the first time, he truly questioned whether remaining close to his parents would allow him to grow as a person or maintain his relationship with Olivia. Emotionally drained and seeking clarity, Ethan began to evaluate his priorities. His marriage, mental health, and personal growth became more important than adherence to family expectations. The decision to step back was not easy. It came with guilt, worry about how his siblings would perceive it, and concern over the reaction of his parents. Yet, the realization that continuing under the existing pressures would only lead to further resentment and emotional damage gave him the courage to act. The breaking point, in essence, was the moment Ethan understood that he needed distance to preserve his well-being and to forge his own identity. Ultimately, this moment marked the beginning of a new chapter in Ethan's life. By choosing to step away from the constant conflict, he asserted his independence, set boundaries with his parents, and committed to building a life that reflected his true desires. The breaking point was painful, emotional, and fraught with uncertainty, but it was also necessary. It was the pivotal moment that allowed Ethan Plath to transition from being a son bound by strict family rules to a man seeking freedom, autonomy, and emotional peace, setting the stage for the next phase of his journey outside the shadow of his family. Leaving the family, after reaching his breaking point, Ethan Plath made the difficult but necessary decision to leave his family, both physically and emotionally. This was not a spur-of-the-moment choice. It was the culmination of years of growing tension, emotional struggle, and a desire to reclaim his own life. Ethan's departure marked a dramatic turning point in the story of the Plath family, as it symbolized the clash between familial expectations and personal freedom. Physically leaving the home meant more than just changing his address. For Ethan, it represented stepping out of the only environment he had ever truly known. The house where rules governed nearly every aspect of life, the TV he was never allowed to watch, the internet he rarely used, and the tightly structured family routines had been his entire world. By moving out, he was breaking free from a lifetime of control, and with that freedom came both relief and fear. He had to navigate a world he had only glimpsed from afar, making decisions on his own, learning to live independently, and facing challenges without the immediate guidance of his parents. Emotionally, leaving the family was even more complex. Ethan loved his siblings and cared for his parents, but he realized that maintaining the previous level of closeness was no longer possible without sacrificing his well-being and his marriage to Olivia. The emotional separation was painful. It included moments of guilt, sadness, and uncertainty about how his departure would impact his family dynamics. His siblings, who had grown up under the same strict rules, witnessed Ethan's independence with a mixture of admiration and confusion. Some were inspired to seek more freedom for themselves, while others struggled to understand why he could no longer stay aligned with the family structure. Ethan's relationship with his parents changed drastically. Boundaries that had been impossible to set before were now firmly in place. Phone calls, visits, and interactions became carefully managed to avoid repeating past conflicts. While this distance caused temporary hurt and tension, it was essential for Ethan to maintain his mental health and cultivate his marriage. Leaving the family allowed him to create a space where he could explore his personal identity, pursue hobbies, and develop independence, things that had been limited or discouraged in his upbringing. Importantly, Ethan's departure was not an act of rebellion without purpose. It was a deliberate choice to preserve relationships in a healthier context, even if that meant redefining them. By stepping away, he sent a clear message. Love for family does not require sacrificing one's own autonomy. His journey illustrates that sometimes leaving is the only way to grow, heal, and become the person one is meant to be. Ethan's decision to leave reshaped the family narrative and set the stage for future challenges, reconciliations, and the evolution of both his own life and the dynamics within the Plath household. Emotional and mental impact. Leaving his family was one of the most significant and challenging decisions Ethan Plath had ever made, and it came with a profound emotional and mental impact. For someone who had spent nearly his entire life within the highly structured environment created by Kim Plath and Barry Plath, stepping away from that world was both liberating and terrifying. Ethan suddenly found himself navigating emotions he had never fully confronted before: guilt, fear, anxiety, and a deep sense of responsibility toward the family he had left behind. Initially, Ethan experienced intense guilt over leaving his parents and siblings. Despite the conflicts that had built up over the years, his bond with them was still strong. He worried that his actions would cause permanent damage to family relationships, and he questioned whether he had made the right decision. The very rules he had followed for so long had instilled in him a sense of duty, making it difficult to reconcile the desire for personal freedom with the fear of hurting those he loved. This inner conflict created emotional turbulence, and there were moments when Ethan doubted whether distancing himself was truly the path to growth. Alongside guilt, Ethan faced the challenge of redefining his identity outside the family. For years, his sense of self had been deeply intertwined with the expectations of his parents and the structured life of the Plath household. Now he had to figure out who he was independently, what he valued, what he wanted for his future, and how he would navigate the world without the familiar framework he had relied upon. This journey of self-discovery was both exciting and overwhelming, forcing him to confront emotions and make decisions he had never been asked to make before. The mental strain was compounded by public scrutiny. As part of Welcome to Plathville, Ethan's personal choices were broadcast to an audience that had grown attached to the family drama. Every move, every argument, and every decision was subject to analysis and judgment. This added pressure made it harder for him to fully process his feelings in private, and created a sense of vulnerability that few people outside the reality TV world could understand. Despite the emotional difficulties, leaving his family also allowed Ethan to experience personal growth and emotional resilience. By establishing boundaries and prioritizing his own well being, he began to gain confidence in his ability to make decisions independently. He learned how to balance love for his family with self care and how to navigate the complicated dynamics of loyalty, trust, and autonomy. Over time, the distance enabled him to see relationships more clearly, evaluate what was healthy, and develop a stronger sense of self. Ethan's emotional and mental journey illustrates a universal truth. Breaking away from toxic or overly controlling environments is rarely easy, but it is often necessary for personal growth, healing, and the development of a healthier, more authentic life. It is a story of struggle, pain, and ultimately resilience, a story that continues to unfold as Ethan moves forward in life, carving out his own path beyond the shadow of the Plath household. Family reactions. When Welcome to Plathville's son decided to distance himself from his family, the reactions were immediate, complex, and emotionally charged. The Plath household, long defined by structure, rules, and rigid expectations, suddenly faced a shift that none of its members were fully prepared for. For Welcome to Plathville mother, Ethan's departure was both shocking and painful. She had invested years in guiding her children according to the principles she believed were best, and the realization that one of her children was choosing a different path created feelings of hurt, confusion, and even fear. For Kim, the separation was not just physical. It felt like a personal challenge to her authority, values, and the family identity she had worked so hard to build. Welcome to Plathville, father responded differently, though not without emotion. While Barry had been somewhat more flexible in his approach, he also struggled to process Ethan's independence. He wanted to support his son, but often found himself caught between loyalty to his wife and concern for the cohesion of the family. Barry's reactions were typically calmer, but underneath his restraint lay a mixture of disappointment, worry, and a desire to see the family reunited. Siblings also experienced a range of emotions. Some were inspired by Ethan's courage and began to question the strict environment they had grown up in, recognizing the importance of personal choice and independence. Others felt conflicted, torn between admiration for Ethan's bravery and fear of betraying the family system that had defined their childhoods. These reactions created an atmosphere of uncertainty and emotional tension within the household, making every family interaction more complex and sensitive. Ethan's decision also sparked long, difficult conversations between family members. Kim and Olivia, in particular, had to navigate a fragile and often contentious relationship. While Olivia supported Ethan's need for autonomy, she also recognized the emotional toll that distance from his family could create. Attempts at mediation were often met with resistance or misunderstanding, highlighting how entrenched the family dynamics had become. Despite the initial pain and conflict, the distance allowed the family to reflect on their relationships in new ways. For Kim and Barry, it forced a recognition that controlling every aspect of their children's lives could push them away rather than keep them close. For Ethan, observing his family's reactions reinforced the importance of boundaries and the need to prioritize emotional well-being. While reconciliation and understanding remained ongoing challenges, these reactions marked a turning point, a gradual shift from rigid control to a more complex, emotionally nuanced understanding of love, family, and independence. In the end, the Plath family's reactions to Ethan's departure underscore a universal truth about families everywhere. Growth often comes through conflict, distance, and the painful process of redefining relationships. Ethan's choice created temporary disruption, but it also opened the door for deeper reflection, self-awareness, and potentially future reconciliation. His departure was not just about leaving a home, it was about challenging old patterns and creating space for change. Life after leaving, after distancing himself from his family, welcome to Plathville's son began a completely new chapter of his life. One defined by independence, personal growth, and the challenges of navigating a world he had rarely experienced before. Life outside the Plath household was liberating, but it also required Ethan to confront realities he had been shielded from for most of his life. The strict environment he had grown up in had kept him safe and predictable, but it had also limited his exposure to everyday decision-making, social dynamics, and the complexities of adult life. Suddenly, Ethan was responsible for everything: finances, career decisions, household management, and balancing his marriage with Olivia, all without the familiar guidance of his parents. One of the most noticeable changes was in his personal identity. Ethan had spent years adhering to rules set by his parents, often at the expense of expressing his own opinions and desires. Away from the household, he could finally explore who he was outside the framework of family expectations. This process of self-discovery included experimenting with new routines, making independent choices, and learning to prioritize his own happiness alongside his responsibilities. Ethan began to recognize that personal freedom was not just about leaving a place. It was about cultivating the confidence to stand on his own and define his values for himself. His marriage to Olivia also grew stronger in this period. Without the constant tension of parental oversight, Ethan and Olivia were able to build a life that reflected their shared priorities and goals. They faced challenges together, learned to navigate disagreements as a team, and created a household culture that balanced love, respect, and independence. This shift allowed Ethan to experience partnership in a way he had never seen in his family, reinforcing the importance of mutual understanding and compromise in personal relationships. However, life after leaving the family was not without its struggles. Ethan occasionally faced feelings of loneliness, guilt, and uncertainty about the future of his relationships with his siblings and parents. He had to establish boundaries to maintain his emotional well-being while managing the expectations and pressures that still existed from the outside world and the reality TV audience following his life. These challenges required patience, self-reflection, and emotional resilience, teaching him lessons about balance, empathy, and the importance of making difficult decisions when necessary. Ultimately, Ethan's life after leaving the Plath household represents a story of growth, courage, and adaptation. By stepping away from the familiar and embracing the unknown, he created the space to develop autonomy, pursue his personal goals, and strengthen his marriage. This phase of his life highlights the complexities of breaking away from controlling environments and demonstrates the transformative power of independence, self-discovery, and emotional resilience. Ethan's journey is a reminder that while leaving a home may be painful, it can also be the catalyst for profound personal growth and a more authentic, fulfilling life. What's next for Ethan? As Welcome to Plathville's son continues to navigate life outside his family, the future holds both opportunities and challenges that will shape the next chapter of his story. Having already taken the courageous step of distancing himself from the strict rules of the Plath household, Ethan now faces the task of building a life defined by his own choices, values, and priorities. This includes strengthening his marriage with Olivia, exploring personal passions, and continuing to define his identity independently of the family dynamics that once dominated his life. One major aspect of Ethan's future will likely involve career and personal development. While the show highlighted his struggles and growth, stepping into the outside world offers him the chance to pursue opportunities he may not have considered before, whether in professional endeavors, creative projects, or public engagement through social media and media appearances. These avenues allow him to establish financial independence and a sense of purpose outside the family context, further reinforcing his autonomy and self confidence. Family dynamics, however, are unlikely to disappear entirely. Ethan's departure has created a new framework for interactions with his parents and siblings. While tension still exists, the distance may eventually lead to healthier communication and potential reconciliation. Over time, both Ethan and his parents may come to understand that love does not require control and that relationships can thrive even with boundaries in place. Reunions or mediated conversations may become possible as all parties adjust to a more balanced dynamic. Another important factor in Ethan's future is his ongoing personal growth and emotional development. He has already experienced the intense pressures of loyalty, guilt, and conflict. And navigating these experiences has given him valuable lessons in resilience, empathy, and self-awareness. Going forward, Ethan will continue to encounter situations that test his patience, decision making, and ability to assert boundaries. But his past experiences have equipped him with the tools to handle these challenges more effectively. Ultimately, the next chapter for Ethan Plath is about creating a life that reflects his authentic self. It is about balancing independence with meaningful relationships, exploring new opportunities, and continuing to grow emotionally and mentally. While the shadow of the Plath family will always be a part of his story, Ethan now has the freedom to write the next chapters on his own terms. The journey ahead is uncertain, but it is filled with potential, a chance for healing, growth, and the fulfillment that comes from choosing one's own path. Ethan's story serves as a powerful example for anyone navigating complex family relationships. Leaving a controlling environment is not a sign of failure, but a courageous step towards self-discovery and a more authentic life. As season 8 and beyond unfold, fans and followers will likely continue to witness how Ethan balances independence, love, and personal growth, and how his choices reshape the narrative of the Plath family for years to come.